Hey there, and welcome. Every single day, we're just bombarded with numbers about the economy. Is it up? Is it down? Or prices soaring? It can be a lot to take in. So today, we're going to cut through all that noise. We're going to decode the two most important numbers you really need to get a handle on the health of our economy. It's the big question, right? It affects every single one of us, from big-time traders on Wall Street all the way to families sitting around the kitchen table. But how do we get a straight answer? We need some kind of report card, a way to actually check the pulse of our country's economic life. So let's dive in and figure it out. You see these headlines literally everywhere, but what do they actually mean for you? We're going to break down gross domestic product, that's GDP, and the consumer price index, or CPI. By the time we're done here, you'll have the tools to understand what these numbers are really saying. All right, first up, the big one, GDP. This is without a doubt the most watched economic number on the planet. It's often treated as the ultimate report card for how a country is doing. So how does this whole thing work? Well, GDP is clever because it measures two things at the exact same time: the total income of everyone in the economy and the total amount spent on everything the economy produces. And the reason it can do that is because of one simple rule. For the economy as a whole, income has to equal spending. Think about it. Every transaction has a buyer and a seller. Every dollar you spend is a dollar of income for somebody else. You can picture it like this giant, continuous loop. Money is just constantly flowing. You buy stuff from a company, right? Your spending becomes their revenue. Then they use that money to pay their workers, their rent, and whatever's left is profit. And all of that flows right back to households like yours as income. GDP is just the measure of this entire flow of money. Okay, I know the official definition here sounds a bit like a textbook, but every single word here really matters. Market value just means we use prices to add up a bunch of different stuff. Apples and oranges, you know? Final is super important. It means we only count the end product. We count the car, not the steel and the tires that went into it. Otherwise, we'd be double counting. And within a country means we're talking about what's made here. It doesn't matter who owns the factory. Now, to really understand what's going on inside the economy, we can split all that spending into four main buckets. This little equation is what they call an identity. It's just always true by definition. Y, which stands for GDP, is made up of consumption, investment, government purchases, and net exports. And when you actually look at the breakdown, wow, one thing just leaps off the page. In the US, household spending, that's the C, is over 70% of the entire economy. That's everything from your morning coffee to a new house. And while that consumer power is a huge engine for growth, some economists do worry that relying so much on spending instead of long-term investment could cause some problems down the road. So if GDP goes up, that's great news, right? Well, maybe. What if the total number just got bigger because all the prices went up, and not because we actually made more stuff? This is the huge problem of inflation, and it's exactly why we need two different kinds of GDP. Okay, here's the key difference you need to know. Nominal GDP uses today's prices. So if prices double, your nominal GDP will double, even if you produce the exact same amount of stuff. Real GDP, on the other hand, is smarter. It uses constant prices from one specific base here. This lets us strip out the effect of rising prices so we can see if we're actually producing more. Let's look at this super simple example to see what I mean. The nominal GDP looks like it's exploding. It goes from $200 to $1,200. That looks like incredible growth. But a huge chunk of that is just because prices went up. The real GDP tells a much more honest story. It shows a more modest increase, from 200 to 500. That reflects the actual growth in how many hot dogs and hamburgers we're making. So the main takeaway here is pretty simple. Real GDP is the number that really, truly matters. It's the one that measures the economy's actual output, which is what reflects our ability to meet people's needs and wants. So when you hear in the news about economic growth, they should be talking about the change in real GDP. Okay, so we've looked at the big 30,000-foot view of the economy. Now let's zoom all the way down to something much more personal, the cost of living. How do we measure the price of, well, everything you buy? This is such a great story. Back in 1931, Babe Ruth was making $80,000, which was an astronomical amount of money. But how does that stack up against the tens of millions top athletes make today? Well, a dollar back then bought a heck of a lot more than a dollar does now. So to even compare them fairly, we need a tool that can adjust for those changing prices over time. And that tool is the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. This is the number you hear about all the time when the news talks about inflation. It's basically designed to track how the cost of living for a typical family is changing. If the CPI is going up, it means your paycheck just doesn't stretch as far as it did before. So, how on earth is it calculated? Well, you can just imagine a giant shopping basket that's filled with thousands of things a normal consumer buys, from rent and gasoline to milk and bread. The Bureau of Labor Statistics tracks the total cost of that exact same basket every single month. And the percentage change in that total cost, that's what we call the inflation rate. So we have real GDP for the big picture, and we have the CPI for our own wallets. But how well do these numbers really capture our well-being? Let's ask the tough question. Are they really a perfect report card? This quote from Robert Kennedy back in 1968 is just so powerful. He argued that GDP is great at counting things like pollution and jail construction, but it doesn't have a way to count the health of our kids, the quality of our schools, or the joy we get from our communities. It measures activity, but not necessarily progress. Here's a perfect example of what he meant. A factory making stuff adds to GDP. Great. But what about the pollution it creates, which harms our health and our planet? GDP doesn't subtract anything for that. And here's the crazy part. If we then spend money to clean up that pollution, that spending also gets added to GDP. It's a real blind spot. And there are other big blind spots, too. GDP doesn't value our free time. If we all worked 7 days a week, GDP would go through the roof, but we'd probably be miserable. It doesn't count any of the unpaid work done at home, like childcare. It ignores the quality of our environment. And it tells us nothing about inequality. It gives us the average, but it doesn't tell us if the economic pie is being shared broadly, or if just a few people are getting all the slices. So where does that leave us? Well, while having a big GDP isn't the only thing that matters, it does give us the ability to afford the things that do. A wealthier country can afford better healthcare, better schools, and a cleaner environment. The key thing to remember is that GDP is a pretty good measure of our capacity, our ability to get the inputs for a good life, even if it doesn't measure the final outcome. Which brings us to a final thought. GDP is what we use, but maybe it's not enough. If you could design a new national well-being index, what would you put in it? Health? Education? Happiness? It's a really interesting question that makes us think about what we truly value as a society. Thanks for joining me for